Hi folks, well tonight we've actually got a decent clear sky, apart from the fact there's a rather bright full moon. So it's going to be an emission nebula we're going for tonight, and in fact I'm going to give the Heart and Soul Nebula a go using the Extreme filter with a one-shot colour camera. I'm Dr. Ray and welcome to AstroGadge. It's a little bit of high cloud about, and the moon's playing a little bit of havoc with the guiding, but everything's set up and running. I've got semi-decent guiding at the moment, and a few subs will be coming in. We'll get back to it, but let's see how we get on. Okay, we're up to frame 12 now. So far so good. I'll be back in a little bit and see how we're getting on. You can see here I'm running a dither. I'm doing that on every frame. I'd probably get away with doing it on every few frames, but hey, it works. So it's one thing I've learned: if it's working, just leave it alone. So yeah, dithering makes a big difference in terms of getting rid of unwanted artifacts, satellite trails and what have you. Certainly improves the quality of the image. Dither or die, as they say. I actually had a bit of an issue with the guiding earlier this evening when I was trying to do a calibration. It kept failing and saying that the star wasn't moving enough. So actually I figured I just went in and checked the setting in ASCOM, and for some reason, you might find this useful actually if you get the same thing. The pulse guide settings in ASCOM, I normally have about 0.3 times sidereal, and I usually find that's working. Now for some reason it had gone back to the default setting of 0.1, so it's just as well I checked that. So once actually re-established that setting there, the thing calibrated fine. So just a little tip there, or observation, that if you're getting that error that the guide star is not moving enough during calibration, then check, if you're using ASCOM, check that the pulse guide settings are not set at the default, but around about 0.3, which I think Chris Shillito recommends. Anyway, just a little side there. As I say, that sorted the issue out. So I've pretty much got the composition that I expected using stellarium, and used the coordinates of this area here in stellarium for the target reference in SG Pro, and it's come out okay. You can see the Heart Nebula here in the fish head part of the nebula. It's known as the fish head, I think, and this is the part of the Soul Nebula. So we're on frame number 7. We're doing 180 second subs, and so far the guiding's not too bad at all. We're getting 0.51. Yeah, and despite the fact there's some high clouds sort of lurking about, and we've got a full moon in that kind of general direction. Touch wood, things don't seem to be too bad at the moment, so I'll be back in a little while and see how we get on. Okay, so the guiding's still good. Total error, what, 0.45? Yeah, look, it's going remarkably well considering the full moon out there. And we are on the 55th sub, which is coming up for 3 hours worth of data. So yeah, all going touch wood remarkably well. So I think, folks, I think that deserves a slurp. Cheers everybody, clear skies. So what I'm going to do is just going to keep this running as long as I can before either the clouds roll in or the target goes behind the big tree in the garden. And so what I'll do is I'll sign off here for the time being and catch up tomorrow once we process the data. But before that, obviously what I'll have to do is take some flats. Okay, so I'm stacking and calibrating the light frames from last night's session using the weighted batch pre-processing script in PixInsight. Alright, so we've calibrated using flats and darks and integrated the subs from last night's imaging session. So this integration here is a total of 3 3/4 hours before the object went behind a tree in the garden. I'm using the screen transfer function here to stretch it. If you get this green background with the one-shot colour camera, the way to do that is simply just to uncheck this little link channel icon, and then we get a more realistic representation of the data. So here we can see, yeah, we've got the Soul Nebula here, and we've got the Heart Nebula and the Fisheye around here. But what you can also see is, despite the L-Extreme dual band filter, we've still got a pretty obvious and apparent gradient from that big, huge, almost full moon. So the first thing we want to do is really get rid of that. Now, before we do that, what we really want to do is perform a background neutralization. Just to speed things up, I've already put these processes up. If you find it goes this sort of weird colour, or you get this weird effect after you use these things, then don't worry, nothing's gone wrong. Then just simply press the stretch button again, auto stretch on the screen transfer function, and all should be well. So not an awful lot of difference, a slight difference using the background neutralization, but we've still got this wicked gradient here. So we've got two choices in terms of dealing with this gradient. The first one is in the process section, you have got the automatic background extractor process. Now that does work quite well, I have to say, using the default settings. But when you get a gradient as bad as this one, it's my experience that you're much better going with the dynamic background extraction tool. So first of all, we highlight the image, and then we tick the subtraction correction. I don't want the background model, so I'm just going to have that be discarded. And the tolerance box here under the parameters, I'm going to set that to about 2. and I'm going to generate the sampling areas. Now what you'll find is that little sampling areas here are being put over parts of the nebula. Now it's best to remove these so that the algorithm can do its thing more efficiently, so it doesn't think that the nebula is part of the gradient. So we kind of ended up with this sort of distribution here, and it's just a question now of hitting the engage icon and letting it do its thing. Here we go, it's done its thing. So let's at this stage of the game, I mean, some people use the SCNR function to get rid of the green tinge, which seems to be a little bit of a green tinge here, but I try to avoid it at this stage if I can, because, so as you can see, it's done a pretty good job. So then at this stage, here's where I like to actually just perform a color calibration. Now you can do it two ways. I'm going to do it the simplest way. Make sure structure detection is enabled, and then just simply execute it. And again, what you find is it gives this horrible sort of output, but again, by simply pressing the auto stretch on the screen transfer function will be correct for that. Okay, so it's made a little bit of a change. If you wanted to be more precise about it, then what you can do, of course, is you can create a white reference sample using the preview boxes, and a dark sample. Which, sorry, it would have been preview one, would have been the dark sample, and the white sample. You do something like that and define these sections in here, and just execute again. But I find for the most part that just using the structure detection works as good as anything, particularly for one-shot color camera stuff. Alrighty, so now what I want to do is clean up this image a little more, because as you can see when we scroll in, zoom in, there's quite a lot of noise in the image. Well, not a lot, but there's noise in the image. And there's a fairly straightforward way of dealing with this noise, a very simple way, which most of the time works very well, and that's in the easy processing script. So if we go to easy denoise, and it'll come up with lots of warnings that if you use this script, then the sky will fall in and it will be the end of civilization as we know it. But if you just press run easy denoise and let the system do its thing. So the easy denoise has done its thing, and if you look in there, it's done a pretty good job. Incidentally, if you do want to speed this up, there's a very good way of speeding processes like this up, particularly processes, well, it relates to processes such as this that use what's called swap files. And the way you can speed it up is by going into Edit, Global Preferences, Directories and Network. And what to do is to set up in different directories. If you've got different hard drives, and it works best with solid state drives. I have 3, and it works best if you, but basically what you should do is create a directory or two different directories in each drive. And what this does is it allows the system to actually allocate the swap files to each of these directories and parallel process them, rather than having to write to one directory and then having to go through things sequentially. That's how I understand it anyway. But the upshot is that if you do this, it does considerably speed up processes such as this that use swap files. Alright, so the next part of the process is to is to make the image non-linear now. Now we've got two choices at this point. First of all, what we need to do is to turn off the screen transfer function. And we've got two choices. The first is, again, if you go back to the easy processing suite here, and you'll see there's a soft stretch, and that will come up, and again it's just simply a question of pressing this and it will stretch the image, but fairly gentle stretch. I personally, although this does work pretty well actually, in fact it is pretty well, but I personally prefer to use the process called mass stretch. And the reason for that is just that you've got a little bit more control over the process again. And what that requires is that you create a sampling box in a sort of relatively dark area of the image. That should be enough. And then define it. Where are we? There we go. So that the process can actually decide, what's black in the image. And like I say, we turn off the screen transfer function and we simply execute this mass stretch. Now there are a number of parameters here which you can play about with. I found for this image these particular settings work pretty well. Again, this takes a couple of minutes, and we end up with this. So we know it's now in a non-linear state, so we can actually dispense with the screen transfer function. The nice thing about the mass stretched process is it really does preserve the colour of the stars quite nicely compared to other methods of stretching linear data into non-linear. Right, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you've seen me do this before, and that's use StarNet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the stars from this image, so to create two new images, one of just a nebula and the second being the star component of the image, with just the stars in it. And again, the default settings work incredibly well usually. And it's just a question of executing it. Again, this can take a little while, so we'll fast forward. Right, so StarNet's done its job now. So as you can see, we've got the component of the image with the stars in it and the other with the two nebulae. So let's put the stars to one side for the time being. So I'll move that down here. And that means we're free to work on the nebulae component. Now I think, as I've said before in other videos, the advantage of doing it this way is you've got a lot more control over the stars, the background, by doing this. So anything we do to the nebulae doesn't affect the stars, it doesn't overbloat them, and so on and so forth. But before we get into that, this is what I like to call the evaluation of the image, the channels in the image, particularly when we're using the Electrum dual narrowband pass filter. The next thing to do is to use this process here called channel extraction, and what it's going to do is it's going to take out the red, green and blue channels from this particular image. It's going to rename them RG and blue. I've called it blue for a reason that'll become obvious in a second. And we can see immediately that we've got a really good signal on hydrogen alpha from the filter. The green channels a bit fainter, which was kind of what you expect for this particular object, because the light from it is principally in hydrogen alpha wavelength. And if you look at the blue, it's really, really noisy and very, very poor signal to noise ratio. Now I think you've seen me do this in previous videos. what I tend to do in this situation is discard the blue channel and create a new one. Well, I can do it two ways, I'll explain in a second. What we want to do next with the remaining channels is basically try and match them in terms of intensity and background as closely as we can by eye. Now, the other way you can do it, if you really want to be extremely flash about it, is to, if you go into processes and look up statistics, and in this case look at the green channel, you can balance it by looking at median values for the intensity of that particular image. But as I say, that's one way of doing it. I find, to be honest with you, it's easy just to do it by eye using the curves tool. So essentially what we want to do is adjust it, this channel here, so as I say, the intensity and background are roughly match visually the red channel, hydrogen alpha. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I'm kind of happy with that. Now what happens next is actually down to artist's prerogative, so it largely depends on what you want your image to look like and how you like your image to look. So, but what we're actually going to do now is we're actually going to recombine these images, and essentially what we could actually do is just simply combine them as a hydrogen alpha equivalent green, so a bicolor image, giving a sort of narrow band-esque kind of Hubble-esque kind of vibe to it. So if you do that, and you know, you'll get something to work with. Or what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to create a synthetic green channel. So to do that, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to actually change the identifier from this to B. Okay, and I'm going to create a synthetic green channel from the red and the blue channel. And to do that, what we're going to do next is we're going to bring out pixel math. Again, people tend to sort of recoil in horror when you use that word, but it's actually pretty straightforward. It's 0.2 times red and 0.8 times blue to create this new green channel, for want of a better word. So there we have it. There's a new green channel. So I'm simply going to change the descriptor in that, call it green. Right, so we can minimize these now. So we're going to use the red channel, hydrogen alpha, as a luminance. We're going to call that red, and the red channel. We're going to put green here, which was originally our blue, if you remember. That makes sense. And we're going to put that, we're going to put that in the blue channel, I beg your pardon. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So the green and the blue. And again, execute that. So that's it done its thing. Notice that I've adjusted the lightness and saturation values here slightly. Again, down to yourself how you want your images to look. And essentially, the recombined image, it looks a bit kind of bland, but there is blue in here. So the next stage is to apply curves to it. Before we start mucking about with this, in terms of creating a particular colour rendition, what we want to do is we want to go and create a mask, and we do that use a range selection tool. And this is a really, really nice tool, this, if you haven't seen it before. Essentially, what it does is it creates a bespoke mask, and it allows you to have a lot of control over what parts of the image you're going to allow to be modified, and which parts are literally going to be masked. And you've got these controls here where you can make the thing fuzzy, mask fuzzier, or make it, it's a bit like the feather tool in Photoshop. Essentially, once you're happy with the mask, and again this may take a couple of attempts to get it right, well, let's just go with what we've got at the moment. So we can get rid of the preview and we just execute this, and it creates our bespoke mask. So I'm just going to minimize that, get rid of that, and we just then just apply it to our image just as we would with any other mask. And at the moment we're protecting the nebula, which is not what we want to do. We want to adjust the nebula but leave the background intact. So again, you go into the usual mask tools at the top here. Let's invert the mask, and straight away you can see, you know, parts of the nebula that are going to be susceptible to adjustment, and the red part means everything else is going to be shielded or masked from any adjustment. We don't need to see the mask, it's still there, but we can simply switch off its visibility. The mask is still active. So now time to start applying curves. And as I say, again, at this point, there's no right or wrong here. It's what you considered, what you're happy with, what pleases you image-wise. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the blue up. I'm going to increase the blue channel, and you can see here in the preview that we're getting some sort of reaction here, which that's not bad. And increase the contrast a little by giving it this kind of slightly S-shaped appearance. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's better. I'm happy with that. And you can see the advantage straight away with this mask is that the blue has only been applied to the nebula and not anything in the background. Isn't that brilliant? So happy with that. So go back to default values. Let's increase the red a little. Oops, sorry, I should have put the preview on. And again, it's just a bit of trial and error. It's whatever you like. Find that very often with this sort of thing as well, as if you pull back the green just a little, then you get kind of slightly more intense coloration. Now the other thing obviously I can do just to make it pop a little is increase the saturation. Little saturation button here. So again, same thing applies. It's best not to overdo it. Just when you're making these adjustments, to do it in tiny little increments, and otherwise it can end up looking a bit overcooked, as I call it. Yeah, that's not too bad. Now here's where I sort of go off piste a little bit. So what I tend to do here, it's a little bit, I don't know if a cheat's the right word, but I just find it easier, and anything that makes life easier is great in my opinion. But first thing we're going to do is just to remove the mask. Alright, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this image as a TIFF file. What I've done now is I've called up another program. This one's called Affinity, but if you've got Photoshop, it'll do the same thing. I like Affinity because it's a one-off payment and it pretty much does everything that I want it to do that Photoshop can do. So I personally think it's quite a great, it's quite a nice little tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak the colours in that image that we just formed. So that basically we open that TIFF file. If you want to do everything obviously in PixInsight, of course you can. Yeah, I just like doing this because I think actually this tool here, it's called Selective Colour, is actually pretty amazing. It can actually really make your really make the image pop actually. And so what it does is it allows you to basically adjust the tonal range and intensity of the different colours in the image. So you've got all these different colours that you can adjust. So for example, if we go to the red and just tweak this slightly, we can make the reds sort of shine a bit, you know, and maybe make it a bit more orange like that. And if we go to the blues, we can make the blues really stand out. Yeah. And it's literally, again, keep saying this, question of experimentation. Again, try avoid. I'm just doing this for quickness sake, but avoid doing big, huge sort of transitions. Try and do it in small increments and see what the effect is. And again, when you've got something that's pleasing to you, then save it, and basically then you can import it back into PixInsight. So here's one I did earlier, took a little bit more time with. That was the original one. That's the original image, which saved after curves, and this is the one that's been subjected to a little tweak of selective colour in Affinity, or indeed you could do it as I say in Photoshop. What I think is quite useful actually is to do a local histogram equalization. That kind of sort of makes things stand out a little bit better. And these are the parameters I find work very well for this image. Again, you can see the effect on the preview. But again, I think what's really quite good habit to get into is when you're doing this sort of thing is reapply the range mask. So you will only want the effect to be confined to the nebula. Sometimes these tools, like local histogram and other tools similar to it, can actually introduce noise into the background. So as I say, I think it's just a wise decision to use a mask in these circumstances. So again, we just invert that, get rid of it, and yeah. So as I say, I've already played about with these parameters. Go and experiment yourself. See what works for you, what works for your particular image. So that's the local histogram equalization being carried out. And again, if we just go back to what it looked like before, that was it before, that was it afterwards. So you can see it's kind of made it pop a little bit, hasn't it? I'm going to try this little script here, which is under Utilities, and it's called Dark Structure Enhance. And I find usually somewhere between 50 and 60 is enough. You can, again, it's like a lot of these things, you can overcook it. That's with. That's without. So again, I just think it makes the image stand out a little bit more. That's what I think anyway. So all these particular scripts and processes, again, it's up to you. You know, whether you want to use them or not. It's what you want the image to look like. So the next thing, well, what we want to do is to recombine the stars that we've removed from the image. We want to actually recombine it with this image that we've manipulated. So again, it's back to good old pixel math. Once you've got this typed in, it's just simply a question of executing it onto the nebula. Do that now. So there we have it. Again, if you felt the stars were a bit intrusive, you could reduce them using the star mask, or indeed going to the easy processing suite scripts, where you've got a nice star reduction script here, which works really well. But I think actually this is where I think the mask stretch works so well. Is that the stars are nice enough. I don't think they're too intrusive. They're not particularly bloated. So I think this works well. So maybe the only thing to do now would be to crop this image slightly, just to give it a more pleasing composition. That's my workflow, and I've rushed it a little bit. Obviously for the final thing, for the final image, I've taken a little bit more time with this, but I just thought I'd go through in a little bit more depth than what I've done before. And as I said, whether you want to use a bi-colour, narrow bandish, pseudo-Hubble kind of thing, or add a synthetic channel like I've done, it's largely a case of experimentation and seeing what the colour rendition looks like with the parameters or the method that you decide to use. And as I say, artist prerogative. Some people might like this, some people might hate it. I think it looks okay, so I'm going to put this up now so you can have a bit more of a look at it. Hi folks, well that's the end of that session. I hope you found it interesting, I hope you found it informative. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that that's the only way to process an astro image. Far from it, it's simply the way I do it, and if you found that useful then I'm really pleased. And if you like the content, please feel free to put the thumbs up. And again, if you've got any suggestions or tips or tricks for me that help improve my workflow or my results generally, then for goodness sake, please feel free to put them in the comments box below. Always willing to learn new things that are going to improve my capture and processing skills. So thanks again, thanks for watching. And if you're new to the channel and you like the content, then please feel free to subscribe. It doesn't cost anything, it simply means that you get heads up in any future content that I may produce. Again, as I say, feel free to hit that button. And for those of you that have subscribed, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. It's very motivating for me. As long as people keep watching, I'll keep making these things. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. But meantime, keep watching the skies.
Watch the skies everywhere. Keep looking. Keep watching the sky.